Can you get me off the hook?
Can't do it, Johnny.
You're going to do me like Tessio, man?
Welcome back to another episode of Hollywood versus Cleveland. John is going to lead today's discussion on The Spanish Prisoner, a 1997 film by David Mamet. Mamet wrote and directed the movie, and he definitely has a distinctive dialogue style, possibly because David Mamet started his career writing for the theater in the 70s. Mamet won a Pulitzer Prize for his play Glengarry Glen Ross, which of course was adapted into a film with that fantastic, famous speech that Alec Baldwin gives.
Put that coffee down.
Mamet received Tony nominations for his plays Glengarry Glen Ross and Speed the Plow. He also wrote and directed the movies House of Games, State and Maine, Homicide, and Heist. And his film writing credits, movies that he wrote but didn't direct, include The Postman Always Rings Twice, The Untouchables, Hoffa, Wag the Dog, and Hannibal. IMDb describes The Spanish Prisoner as an employee who develops a lucrative secret process for his corporation, is tempted to betray the company when higher-ups attempt to take the process from him. Dastardly intrigue ensues. That employee is, of course, Joe Ross, played by Campbell Scott, who, by the way, is the son of George C. Scott. I didn't know if you knew that, John. Son of George C. Scott and Colleen Dewhurst. The movie also stars Steve Martin, Rebecca Pidgeon, Ben Garza, Felicity Huffman, and Ricky Jay. Okay, folks, here is your official spoiler warning. John is about to dive into this movie with spoilers all over the place. So if you haven't seen The Spanish Prisoner, we highly recommend you go watch the movie and then watch this analysis. Okay, Parrish? So, John, take it away. How did you first come across this movie, and what fascinates you about it?
Well, first of all, I will say, if you care about spoilers, I'm going to just double down on the spoiler alert because we're going to reveal aspects about it that will ruin it in some way.
That's what we call the Hollywood versus Cleveland double dare.
I don't remember where I first heard about it. I think I was looking at Steve Martin films for some reason. I'm not a huge Steve Martin fan for any given reason. I like The Jerk, but I mean, I'm not, it's not like I'm some huge fan.
Well, excuse me!
But I think I had read that this was one of his non-comedic turns.
Could you drop this off for my sister, Mrs. De Silva at the Wilshire?
Sure.
You don't mind?
I'm glad to do it.
I guess I was just kind of curious, and I heard it was a thriller. So it is kind of this Hitchcockian thriller. There is this Hitchcockian sort of stepwise suspense thing going on, and you're slowly given more information as the movie goes on. And I think that's done pretty well. But what I was going to also mention is I watched Glengarry Glen Ross without knowing anything about David Mamet when that movie came out. And I was just more interested in the actors in that film. And I was just so blown away by it. And of course, as you said, he's not the director, but he was the writer. And he turned out to be the element that I think I was interested in, which is this fast-paced, strange kind of dialogue, which doesn't feel natural almost.
Yeah, for lack of a better word, I would call his dialogue stylized. It's not exactly realistic. They speak rhythmically, almost poetically. They repeat phrases that the other one just said in a way that normal people speaking don't. And, like you said, they rarely overlap each other. So it's not really exactly realistic. That's why it kind of reminds me of The Stage. But here is David Mamet himself talking about his dialogue style on a recent episode of Club Random with Bill Maher. Let's take a look.
Watch.
What I'm actually doing as a dramatic writer is writing free verse. What's actually happening is an epic poem that's been in 2 or 3 parts so that one person is finishing the other's sentence, and it's all rhythmic.
But I mean, that reminds me of Shakespeare, right? Or a stage play where there's a lot of blocking going on, not just physically, but sections of dialogue and, where you are when you're saying it. I think in State and Maine, you see this it's just crazy in State and Maine. It's like
That's right.
people will move to an area, stop, and have dialogue.
Put a VHS, an air conditioner, and a refrigerator in that room, she's gonna blow.
No, the labor with a first child can sometimes be prolonged as much as...
What's an associate producer credit?
It's what you give to your secretary instead of a raise.
Which again feels like the theater to me.
Yeah.
So I'll be honest with you. Like, look, I'm not, David Mamet, he has an amazing career and he's got some incredible movies he could buy and sell me 100 times over. But for me, it takes me out of it a little bit. That's not the style that I like. That said, I mean, I love Glengarry Glen Ross. It's not as pronounced in that movie. It is absolutely still there, but it's not quite as pronounced. It still feels like a stage in a way, the film itself. But maybe it's because it's directed by James Foley. It's not quite as in your face. But John, here's an example from House of Games in terms of Mamet's style of dialogue, where I feel that describes what we're talking about perfectly. Let's take a look.
Did I ever tell you my name? My name is Mike.
Glad to meet you.
Well, I'm glad to meet you too.
I have a proposition for you.
And what's your name?
Listen to this. How would you feel if someone were to do a study of the confidence game? And someone were to talk to you and learn your views and watch how you operate?
A study of?
Yes.
For what?
For my own reasons.
What are you, a journalist?
I'm a writer. I'm a sort of writer.
You're a sort of writer, and that's why you came back here to write?
How would you feel about that?
What did you come back here for?
I came back here to write. I came back here... I would like to see how you operate.
Is that the idea? You want to see how a true bad man plies his trade?
Yes.
And John, that again, personally for me, it's not quite my thing. I've enjoyed all these movies, though, that said. But dude, I wanted to mention his dialogue style reminds me of Wes Anderson. Or at least there's something different about Wes Anderson. And Rushmore is probably my favorite comedy of all time. But a lot of his dialogue, I feel like, is delivered sort of like emotionlessly and in this stylized way where that to me inhibits me caring about the characters a little bit. And I'll wrap it by saying I'm more of a Glengarry Glen Ross guy than I am a House of Games guy. And I'm more of a Rushmore guy than I am of the Grand Budapest Hotel guy. Like a little bit of that I love and doesn't take me out of it. When it becomes, so theater-like, it does kind of bug me.
But I don't think that's a coincidence, right? Because, I mean, Wes Anderson is clearly interested in sort of staging environments. I mean, Rushmore in particular, there's a staging theme that goes on in that movie. And that movie ends up with a stage production of Vietnam. And I mean, that feel like we're sort of acknowledging the fact that this is a performance as opposed to going for like realism where people are sort of how they naturally talk. The comparison I like to make is with Altman, who loves to have these natural conversations kind of just fall out of people because he likes that. He likes the natural feel of people and the sort of vibe that they're giving off with each other rather than this controlled sort of situation where every distraction is supposed to hold your attention in a purposeful way. I was thinking about the movie MASH, where they all sit down in the mess tent at the same time or at different times. People are sitting down with their tray to eat, and the people are talking over each other, and it's almost a little bit hard to follow.
Oh, just a little bit. Thank you. Ooh. Yeah.
But she's got to.
I think I'm in love.
That FISA hex soap on her face. She really
that's
is very
so
acne.
dry.
It really is.
So
Maybe
she's
that's got a bad complexion like that.
She's afraid.
Well, you see, the truth is, Lieutenant, I don't have anything to do tonight. I just got into town and, well, I thought maybe you could show me around.
Captain, I think if you'll notice the lieutenant's beautiful hand, she is definitely married.
But to me, that's like the opposite of what Mamet is up to, which is very like controlled, constructed conversations and blocking going on while they're talking. They're both interesting. I don't know that one is better than the other. I mean, it's a little over the top, and I think that's on purpose. I think
it's
he's going for that sort of look and feel. And in The Spanish Prisoner, it just works for me. And so this movie is about a con game. And essentially the main character, this guy, Joe, is going through the experience of being conned. And as a viewer, we only know as much information as he does. So it's not like it's a third person where you get to see other things happening away from him. You're always with him, so you're only getting the information at the same time he is. And in a con, when you have somebody who doesn't know what's going on, they're usually referred to as a mark. For me, slowly, I'm realizing the mark in the movie is me or the viewer in general, because we're being tricked at the same time as Joe is. Joe goes through a series of questionable plot twists that make sense at the time, but later on are revealed to be cons.
It is the oldest confidence game on the books. The Spanish Prisoner.
And the movie acknowledges this and walks you through them.
You now have a Swiss bank account, anybody asks. Crédit National du Genève, code word Patty.
Why? You got any undisclosed bank accounts?
What?
Undisclosed bank accounts.
No.
No Swiss bank accounts.
No, I told.
So the movie is basically calling attention to the fact that the con is happening while you're watching it. The example or comparison that I really like here is M. Night Shyamalan's Sixth Sense. I mean, that movie is in some ways a con, right? A con on the viewer. The viewer is a mark because he's tricking you on purpose. And by the time you get to the end of the movie, he walks you through all of the places where you were tricked. And he points them out to you in the movie.
They only see what they want to see.
Walking you back through that is the comparison that I'm making. So Joe gets conned in this movie how many times? And we're realizing along with him, like how he was conned, right? So we're being like brought into that process.
Yeah, help you, sir?
Yeah, I'd like to leave a package, please.
Certainly.
For Mrs. De Silva.
Mrs. De Silva. Oh, we have a package for Mrs. De Silva.
I'm sorry, a package for Mrs. Emma De Silva. Young Mrs. De Silva, a tennis player.
This is the only Mrs. De Silva in the building. This is Mrs. Emma De Silva, sir.
And this sort of snowballs into a completely ridiculous situation where he's trying to get on top of the cons that keep happening to him. And the movie is cheekily showing us, like almost brazenly, that you're being conned. So the mark is not really Joe. The mark is you. And the storytelling is the con. It's tricking you into believing some situation. And I think this movie is like attempting to do a comparison between those concepts. Like storytelling is a bit of a con. The way that this sort of reveals itself is through a series of absurd coincidences that escalate as you go through the movie.
How do I get to Santa Steph now?
The traditional way, you fly.
They're looking for me at the airports.
They're not going to be looking for you in Boston.
Accidentally, a truck pulls in front of them that has the word Boston on it. Oh, let's go to Boston Airport. So some random truck is the reasoning that gets them over to Boston, where the FBI crew meets them and they have a whole plan set up over there with a woman getting in line with a kid and a book.
And if you can think of any other thing, something he touched, or you have your ticket.
Thank you.
You've gotten your fingerprints all over the book. You've torn it and you've got your fingerprints all over it.
The book left his fingerprints on the... He left his fingerprints on the tennis book.
Honey, or the cover on the book with your fingerprints on it.
We're going to have to get it fixed at that book repair shop on 4th Avenue.
That sequence of events is borderline absurd.
Right, right.
I mean, you know, and these are details where who gives a crap? But on the other hand, I think he's almost kind of throwing it in our face. Like, I think Mamet is like poking you or, you know, saying, hey, start paying attention. I've conned you like 3 times now. When are you going to pick up on the fact that this is ridiculous? All those cops would have to be in on the con.
Good morning, ma'am, sir.
All right, move on. Keep moving out of the terminal.
You bet I'm gonna keep moving out of the terminal. Don't you smile at me.
Come on, baby. Bring it on.
They would have to make sure that he gets let go so he can get caught at the airport. Why don't they just catch him there? I mean, why doesn't she get out of the car?
Now that I think about it, those cops theoretically may not have been part of the con.
Well, that's my whole point. Who is and who's not.
Right,
And
right.
I guess where I'm going with this is that I think everyone is in on the con. And by everyone I mean the whole world. Because the whole world is not really the whole world. It's Mamet's story. And he can do whatever he wants.
Yeah, you're in a lot of trouble.
I haven't done anything wrong.
Not from me, Mr. Ross. From him.
Absolutely. Mamet's full control of the con. And that's how a con works. Control of the story. All the information that you're getting has been controlled. And that's what you're getting when you go to a movie. You get controlled information. Mamet has it way better than any con man because he's in full control of the sounds you hear, the characters you encounter, the way they act, the information that you get access to. All of that is revealed to you at their whim. Everybody's in on the con as far as Mamet is concerned because we're the mark.
Now, Mr. Ross, if I told you this story, would you believe it?
And that's what my point is in a nutshell. It's the story is so stupid.
I want a lawyer.
When you hear it on paper or look at it in hindsight, but as you're going through it, it's totally fine for some reason. And that's what a con is. That is a con because as long as you're believing it and pulling out your wallet, you believe it. And no matter how silly it is afterwards. And then the very last scene when he's getting on the boat and those U.S. Marshals had got on that boat. So Susan and Joe get on the boat. How the hell did those Marshals know they were going to get on the boat? If anything, after Joe figures this out, they're not going on that boat. But in the moment, you're like, oh, these guys are one step ahead of him. And this is how, the world works. Criminals are so crafty, blah, blah, blah. And the circumstances of us being on a boat in Boston at this point are completely absurd.
And we come to the end of a perfect day.
Clang, clang, end of the line.
All of these increasingly absurd events go back to a literary concept called the unreliable narrator. Basically, what's happening here is you're reading a story and the voice in the story is actually unreliable. The person is not telling you the truth, and you kind of figure that out as a reader or as a viewer. That literary element or thematic kind of element is useful in playing with the viewer a little bit, and it plays into being a mark as well that you can't trust the information that you're getting. And this explodes out if you take what I'm saying to have any validity. This explodes out not just to the characters in the movie, but to the creator of the movie himself. He's an unreliable narrator, and you're the mark. So usually if you read a book, let's say, and the narrator is unreliable, the author is over there. The author's still on your side. The author's kind of winking at you and saying, yeah, this guy's lying to you. Sorry. But in this case, the author is lying to you.
They played me for such a fool.
That's fascinating because an unreliable narrator, they give you hints he's unreliable. Maybe he hit his head or maybe he's on medication.
Or he's lying to himself about
Sure.
how handsome he is.
And you get those clues. But this idea of the author being the ultimate unreliable narrator is fascinating, especially in the context of the Spanish Prisoner. Sorry, that's awesome.
I thought of everything.
Of course he thought of everything. He's writing the story. It's inevitable that he thought of everything because we're watching a movie where somebody has constructed a story for us. So when we talk about Hitchcockian or suspense thrillers, there's typically something for the viewer to have a reason to care about the story itself, the plot. In the Hitchcock way, it's called a MacGuffin. It gives us a reason or a purpose for all the other things to happen. It gives focus and it centers everybody. So in this movie, obviously, the MacGuffin is like the process.
The process. And by means of the process, to control the global market.
And this process is complete?
It's near completion.
Near completion.
Very near.
It's like this thing that we don't really, I mean, we know it's like a business process and we know everybody wants it, but we don't really know what it is. We just know it's like a bunch of math and stuff. And I think, with MacGuffins, it's often not important.
Right. Well, yes. So MacGuffins in film, it is kind of a tricky concept at first to wrap your head around. But basically, a MacGuffin is an object, device, or person or event that is necessary in terms of driving the plot and possibly the motivations of the characters. But in and of itself, it's not important. So in a way, it's important, in terms of the movie could kind of be about that. But in a sense, the MacGuffin by itself is not important. And let me give you a hypothetical example. Let me double down. Oh, the good person, Cleveland. Double down.
It's all burning.
Okay, there's a movie where two spies, one good, one bad hero antagonists are after stolen space plans. And whoever gets the plans, their country is going to dominate global politics and the global economy for decades to come. And if it falls into the bad guy's hands, all hell is going to break loose. So the space plans themselves are important. The movie's about that in a sense, but what the movie's really about is these two spies fighting to get them. So exactly what the space plans are they for a space station? Is it for a spaceship? Is it a nuclear bomb in space that they can deploy from space? We don't really need to know that. That in itself doesn't matter as much as the thriller. So Hitchcock, the master of suspense, who popularized the term MacGuffin in his movies, but it actually, we believe, was come up with originally by Angus MacPhail, who wrote The Wrong Man for Hitchcock in 1965 and Spellbound in 1945 for Hitchcock. And we don't know this for sure, but he may have taken MacPhail, taken that from his name, and Guffin, which means trivial or foolish. So I think that to me makes sense, although apparently we don't know that for sure. Here's the master of suspense himself describing what the MacGuffin is on the Dick Cavett Show.
Let's watch.
Can you explain what a MacGuffin
is?
Yes,
a MacGuffin you see in most films about spies. It is a thing that the spies are after. In the days of Rudyard Kipling, it would be the plans of the fort on the Khyber Pass.
Mm-hmm.
It would be the plans of an airplane engine and the plans of an atom bomb, anything you like. It's always called the thing that the characters on the screen worry about, but the audience don't care.
So, John, going to, you mentioned the boat horn when Jimmy's talking at the end.
Yeah, it interrupts or it clouds over there.
Oh, big time. So he's finally Joe Ross is demanding answers about the process. Who'd you sell it to? What's the deal? And he goes, if you must know. And he starts giving the details, and this boat horn comes in.
Yeah.
What'd you do with the process?
That's your last request?
Yes. Could you grant me that?
We took the report, and we sold it to Switzerland. We put it on a CD-ROM. In my bank account as soon as you're dead.
You don't have to do this.
And that, to your point, is Mamet throwing it in your face. It does not matter.
Yeah.
That's not the point of the movie. The process, yes, it's integral to the plot, but the details don't matter, and that's perfect for the MacGuffin. And if you're confused, here are 5 examples to help wrap your head around it. Number 5, the military secrets in the 39 steps. Alfred Hitchcock, Richard Hanny. He stumbles into this espionage thriller that involves these secret military plans that the bad guys are trying to get out of the country. That's what motivates, that's what brings him into the story and plot. But those plans themselves really don't have any bearing on the action. In fact, we don't even find out what the plans are until the last shot of the movie.
Mr. Memory, what was the secret formula you were taking out of the country?
Seen in end elevation, the axis of the two-line of cylinder.
When Mr. Memory starts reciting the super detailed plans that he memorized, and it sounds like it's about this nearly silent plane engine.
Device renders the engine completely silent. Am I right, sir?
Quite right, old chap.
Thank you, sir.
But the fact that that's what the plans are, not really important. What's important is us following this character who stumbles into danger when he meets the female spy in the first scene, and she's killed in his apartment. And by the way, going back to Spanish Prisoner, totally Hitchcockian when you've got this innocent guy in the middle of this crazy world, and we're with that person experiencing it. So you were right to compare this to a Hitchcock movie. Rosebud and Citizen Kane. That's a MacGuffin. Rosebud is mentioned because it's the last words of this newspaper media mogul, Charles Foster Kane's last words. And a reporter comes in to write the story. What does Rosebud mean? That's what the reporter's trying to find out. That's what launches this whole story into the character of Charles Foster Kane. But the audience is the only one who finds out what Rosebud is. And they don't find that out until the last shot. That's not what the movie's about. The movie's about Charles Foster Kane. Doug in The Hangover. The whole movie is them trying to find their friend. But Doug himself isn't really important to the movie other than driving their initial actions. The whole movie is really them piecing together what happened the night before. And yes, it's all to find Doug. But Doug really is inconsequential. Doug could be Steve or Bob. It doesn't really matter. And as we've talked before about story versus plot, Doug has nothing to do with the story of The Hangover. The story of The Hangover is Stu and him finally standing up to his wife. That's the story. He's the main character in this crazy, ridiculous comedy ensemble. The structure is Stu and checking in on him on how he feels about his wife. And at the very end, when they finally find Doug and get back to the wedding, Stu finally stands up to his wife.
Because whatever this is ain't working for me.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Since when?
Since you fucked that waiter on your cruise last June. Boom!
Number 2, R2-D2 in Star Wars Episode 4, A New Hope, 1977. R2-D2. He's got the plans for the Death Star. And so it's about getting R2-D2 back to the rebellion. But it's kind of an afterthought. And, yes, the space planes, and they finally do get him back. And then they've got him up. And they go over what their plans are to
do
be
a bunch of stupid shit in that movie too. Like, it's almost like acknowledgement of the MacGuffin, where it's like, C-3PO and R2-D2 are in this like little craft going away, and they're like, "Hey, what about that thing?" And they're like, "Oh, there's no life science for you."
Right. I bought that, and saying that there's a bunch of stupid shit in Star Wars 1977, I would just say, fuck you. Number 1. The briefcase in Pulp Fiction. This is my favorite. It's a great MacGuffin. The briefcase drives the action, drives the initial action. Vincent and Jules are employed by Marcellus Wallace to get the briefcase back.
Open it.
But we never, ever are told clearly what's in the briefcase.
Is that what I think it is?
Mm-hmm. But yeah, I do believe the theory that what's in the case, although it doesn't really matter, what's in the case is Marcellus's soul. So that's the MacGuffin film tool or device. And as you mentioned, the process, this sort of business, process that's going to make everybody tons of money is the MacGuffin in The Spanish Prisoner. But you've got more thoughts on that, which are great.
With the process, as MacGuffins go, it doesn't really matter what the actual code is. But the process, to me, what it represents is the screenplay itself of that movie, because that's what the movie is doing.
Just kidding, just kidding. Don't shave your bush.
The process, to me, what it represents is the screenplay itself of that movie, because that's what the movie is doing. I mean, this isn't quite a murder mystery, it's a suspense film, but in both of those types of movies, the viewer is trying to get to the bottom of it, right? They're trying to understand some tricky event. That's what we're up to when we're watching the movie. And in a sense of The Spanish Prisoner, the process, in my mind, in the way I read the movie, it's a screenplay. And that keeps with this absurd theme of what you're watching right now is a con. To me, where this clicked is that very last scene. And we have a slow-mo of the other U.S. Marshal taking her tranquilizer gun out, and she shoots him. And, you know, the climax has been achieved. You know, the villain has been put down, the cops are there.
And now I suppose you'll take the process to Japan.
United States Marshal Service, actually.
And the relief sets in, and we have closure on this movie. And he kind of looks at her and he's like,
stun gun? What if you missed?
Well, then it'd be back to the range for me.
And, you know, to me, that's emblematic of the absurdity of this whole thing. It's just so many things are left up to just chance. But because it's in a screenplay, it's not up to chance. It's written down what's going to happen. So there isn't any chance at all. There's no risk to him not walking down the street with his coffee and not seeing the cars being sold and talking to Jimmy. There's no risk to him not getting in line behind the kid with the mom and talking about fingerprints on the book.
You've torn it and you've got your fingerprints all over it.
Book. Left his fingerprints on the tennis book.
Or noticing that there's a gun in the purse that she gives him instead of a camera. And there's no risk at all to him finding the bathroom.
The pool's too warm.
You swim every day?
I try to.
There's no risk to any of that because everything is in the control of the screenplay and it's all been predetermined. And the con is that the process is what you just watched. It's the screenplay. I think what it is a remark on storytelling itself. You know, storytelling is in some sense a con.
Awesome. I love this theory of yours, man. I think it's awesome. I've totally bought into it. And we want to be conned when we go see a movie. We want to enjoy it, but it doesn't always work.
Yeah.
But here, Mamet, I think, does such a marvelous job here because it is ridiculous, but I'm in it. It's kind of like you lost your money and you're home, and then you start to realize, wait a minute, I just got taken. So that's cool, man. I love it. I think that's a super, super cool theory, man. Well, John, thank you for talking to me about The Spanish Prisoner.
Peace in the Middle East. Talk to you later.